stroke. Someone call 911. He's having a stroke.
The crystal water glass slipped from 7-year-old Tommy Washington's hand, shattering against the Italian marble floor. But it wasn't the breaking glass that made 22-year-old Belinda Johnson drop her cleaning supplies and sprint across the mansion's grand dining room. It was the way Tommy's face drooped on one side, like melting wax. The way his left arm hung limp while his right hand clutched desperately at the air where the glass had been. "Stroke!" Belinda shouted, catching Tommy as his legs buckled. "Someone call 911! He's having a stroke!" Richard Washington, billionaire tech mogul, looked up from his phone with irritation. "What are you talking about? Children don't have strokes. He probably just needs his ADHD medication adjusted." "Tommy, stop being dramatic." But Belinda was already on the floor, cradling Tommy's head, watching his eyes drift to one side, seeing the confusion and terror in the one eye that could still focus. She recognized these symptoms like they were written in neon lights, the same symptoms everyone had missed in her little brother 5 years ago until it was too late. "Mr. Washington, listen to me," Belinda said, her voice cutting through his dismissal like steel. "Your son is having a pediatric stroke. FAST. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911. We have maybe minutes before permanent brain damage." "You're a maid," Richard snapped. "You've been here exactly 3 days. I think I know my own son better than—" Tommy's body began to seize. That's when Belinda did something that would later save not just Tommy's life, but thousands of others. She pulled out her phone, hit record, and started live streaming to her nursing school classmates' group chat. "I need witnesses. 7-year-old male, obvious stroke symptoms, father refusing treatment. Someone call 911 to the Washington estate on 5th Avenue. Now." The comments flooded in immediately. Nurses, doctors, medical students all seeing what Richard couldn't or wouldn't. Within seconds, 3 different people had called emergency services. "How dare you!" Richard roared, reaching for her phone. But Belinda held it away, still recording, still focused on Tommy. "Your pride or your son's life, Mr. Washington? Choose fast." But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began. 3 days earlier, Belinda Johnson stood outside the Washington mansion, her heart pounding. 22 years old, 1 year away from finishing nursing school, drowning in student loans. She needed this job desperately, not just for the money, but for the flexible hours that would let her continue her studies. The ad had been simple. Live-in maid needed for prominent family. Must be discreet, reliable, and good with children. Excellent pay. What it hadn't mentioned was that Richard Washington had gone through 6 maids in 2 months, or that his 7-year-old son Tommy was what the agency delicately called challenging. "He's not a bad kid," Mrs. Chen, the house manager, had explained during Belinda's interview. "Just energetic. ADHD, you know. His mother passed away 2 years ago, and Mr. Washington, well, he manages things his way." What happened next still gives me chills. Belinda's first day had been overwhelming. The mansion was 12,000 square feet of marble and glass, like a museum where people happened to live. Richard Washington worked from home but might as well have lived on another planet, locked in his office from dawn until midnight, emerging only to bark orders or complain about noise. And Tommy was a whirlwind of motion and chaos. He ran through the halls, crashed into furniture, threw things when frustrated. The previous maids had tried to control him, contain him, quiet him down. Belinda watched him differently. Her brother Marcus had been the same way before his stroke. Hyperactive, they'd said. Behavioral problems. Just needs more discipline. Nobody had noticed the subtle signs, the way he'd suddenly get clumsy on one side, the brief moments his words would slur, the headaches he'd mention then forget about. Not until that terrible morning when 9-year-old Marcus had collapsed at breakfast, his brain already too damaged from the stroke nobody knew was coming. He'd survived, but he'd never walk properly again, never speak clearly again. All because everyone had been too busy seeing a problem child to notice a medical emergency building. Wait, I need to tell you something crucial here. On her second day, Belinda had noticed things about Tommy that made her nursing instincts prickle. The way he'd suddenly drop things, but only with his left hand. The brief moments where his face would go slack, just for a second, before snapping back to normal. The complaints about headaches that Richard dismissed as attention-seeking. She'd tried to mention it to Mrs. Chen. "Has Tommy ever been evaluated by a neurologist? Why would he need that? He sees the best pediatrician in the city. takes medication for his ADHD. Mr. Washington doesn't believe in over-medicalizing children. But Belinda knew what she was seeing. She'd spent the last 3 years studying it, driven by the guilt of not recognizing it in Marcus. Pediatric stroke symptoms were different from adult strokes, subtle, easy to mistake for other things, often dismissed as behavioral issues. She'd started keeping notes in her phone. Tuesday, Tommy dropped his juice cup 3 times, all with left hand. Wednesday morning, brief facial droop during breakfast, lasted maybe 5 seconds. Wednesday afternoon, complained of the worst headache ever, then forgot about it within minutes. Little did they know, this decision would change everything. On the morning of day 3, Belinda had been cleaning the dining room when Tommy came down for breakfast. Richard was there, surprisingly, though his face was buried in his tablet, reviewing market reports. "Morning, Dad," Tommy had said, his voice slightly slurred. Richard hadn't looked up. "Sit properly, Thomas. Eat your breakfast. Your tutor will be here at 9. Belinda watched Tommy try to pick up his fork. His left hand wouldn't cooperate. He switched to his right, frustration building in his face. "Tommy," she said gently, "are you feeling okay?" "My head hurts," he mumbled, "and my arm feels funny, like it's asleep but not asleep." That's when Belinda's blood had run cold. She'd walked over, knelt beside him, and asked, "Can you smile for me?" Tommy tried. The right side of his face lifted normally. The left side barely moved. "Mr. Washington," Belinda had said, her voice urgent but controlled, "I think Tommy needs medical attention." "He's fine," Richard said without looking up. "He's always complaining about something. It's how he gets out of his lessons." But then Tommy had reached for his water glass, and everything changed. Can you imagine how terrifying that must have been? Watching a child's body betray him while his father, the one person who should protect him, refused to see it. The glass had shattered, and Belinda had seen all the signs align like a terrible constellation. The facial droop, the arm weakness, the confusion in Tommy's eyes. Classic stroke presentation, just like in her textbooks, just like with Marcus. But this time she knew what it was. "Stroke!" she'd shouted, her training overriding any deference to her employer. They had no idea they only had 3 hours to save Tommy's brain function. Actually, let me pause here because this detail is important. When Belinda had started live streaming, she wasn't just recording for evidence. She was connecting to a network of medical professionals she'd met through her advocacy work for pediatric stroke awareness. Within seconds, her video had been shared to emergency rooms across the city. Dr. Patricia Holmes at Mount Sinai had seen it. Dr. James Rodriguez at Presbyterian, nurse practitioner Sarah Kim at Cornell. All of them recognized what Belinda was showing them. The comments had flooded in. "Classic pediatric stroke presentation. Get him to an ER now. Every minute counts. I'm calling 911 from here. Sending an ambulance from Presbyterian." Richard had stood frozen, watching his son seize, watching this young maid he'd hired 3 days ago take charge with an authority that came from knowledge, not position. "Why are you recording this?" he'd demanded. "Because when your son survives," Belinda had said, never taking her eyes off Tommy, "you're going to need to see what almost happened, because you wouldn't listen to a black maid who knew more than you did." The words had hit like a slap. Richard's face had gone white as the reality crashed into him. His 7-year-old son was having a stroke, and he'd been about to let pride kill his only child. What happened next still makes my heart race. The ambulance had arrived in 6 minutes, a record for Manhattan. The paramedics had taken one look at Tommy and confirmed everything Belinda had said. They'd loaded him quickly, professionally, while rattling off medical terminology that Richard didn't understand, but Belinda did. "Are you the mother?" one paramedic had asked Belinda, seeing how she held Tommy's hand, how she knew exactly what information they needed. "No, She's coming with us," Richard had interrupted. "She saw it first. She knows. She knows what's happening." In the ambulance, Belinda had held Tommy's hand while the paramedics had worked. She'd spoken to him softly, even though he couldn't respond, telling him he was brave, that he was going to be okay, that the doctors would help him. Richard had sat in the corner, his billion-dollar empire meaning nothing in that moment, watching a young woman he'd dismissed as just the maid become the most important person in his son's fight for survival. "How did you know?" he'd asked quietly. "My brother," Belinda had replied, not taking her eyes off Tommy. "Same age, same symptoms. Nobody listened to my mother when she said something was wrong. By the time they finally did tests, the damage was permanent. Is Tommy going to be—" "We caught it faster. Thanks to the live stream, half the ER is already preparing. He has a chance, a good chance. But Mr. Washington, she'd looked at him then, her dark eyes full of a wisdom that shouldn't belong to someone so young. After this is over, we need to talk about what I've been seeing all week, the warning signs that everyone missed. In exactly 17 minutes, they would discover something that would change everything. At the hospital, the ER team had been ready. Dr. Patricia Holmes, who'd seen Belinda's live stream, had already ordered the CT scan, had the stroke team on standby, had the clot-busting medication prepared. Belinda Johnson? Dr. Holmes had said, recognizing her from the video. Nursing student at Columbia? I've read your papers on pediatric stroke recognition. You just saved this boy's life. Richard had stood there, stunned, as medical professionals had treated his maid, this young black woman he'd hired to clean his house, like a colleague, like a hero. The CT scan had revealed the truth. Tommy had a rare condition called moya-moya disease, causing progressive narrowing of blood vessels in his brain. He'd been having small strokes for months, maybe years, each one dismissed as behavioral issues, ADHD symptoms, attention-seeking. Without immediate intervention, Dr. Holmes had explained to Richard, he would have had a massive stroke within days, maybe hours. The warning signs were all there. Ms. Johnson saw them when everyone else saw a difficult child. But that's when they discovered something that made their blood run cold. The brain scans glowed on the computer screen like a map of missed opportunities. Dr. Holmes traced her finger along the white spots scattered throughout Tommy's brain tissue, each one a small stroke that had been dismissed as something else. This one, she pointed to a spot near the language center, probably caused the speech delays noted in his kindergarten records. This cluster here would explain the clumsiness his previous pediatrician documented. And these, she paused, her voice heavy with frustration. These are from the last month. Fresh damage that was happening while everyone called it ADHD. Richard Washington stood frozen, staring at the evidence of his failure as a father. Beside him, Belinda held Tommy's chart, reading through 3 years of medical records, her jaw clenching tighter with each page. 6 different doctors, she said quietly. 6 different doctors saw him over 3 years. Not one ordered a neurological workup, not one. They said I was overreacting, Richard's voice cracked. That I needed to be firmer with discipline. Dr. Morrison even suggested military school would straighten him out. What happened next still gives me chills. Tommy lay in the pediatric ICU, sedated after emergency surgery to restore blood flow to his brain. The procedure had been successful, but the damage from years of mini-strokes was permanent. He would need months of therapy to relearn things his brain had lost. Can I ask you something? Dr. Holmes said to Richard. Your son's primary pediatrician, Dr. Morrison, he's chief of pediatrics at Presbyterian, isn't he? Yes, the best in the city. Or so I thought. He's also on the board of Neurotech Pharmaceuticals, Belinda said suddenly, looking up from her phone. They make the ADHD medication Tommy was prescribed, the really expensive one that isn't covered by most insurance. The room went silent. What are you suggesting? Richard asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. I'm not suggesting anything, Belinda replied carefully. I'm just noting that Tommy was prescribed a $3,000 per month ADHD medication instead of getting a $500 MRI that would have shown the moya-moya disease, and that Dr. Morrison personally profits from every prescription he writes for that medication. Wait, I need to tell you something crucial here. Belinda pulled out her laptop, the one she used for nursing school, and began pulling up research. Mr. Washington, in the last 3 years, diagnoses of ADHD in wealthy families have increased by 400%. Prescriptions for this particular medication have increased by 600%. And guess what hasn't increased? Neurological screenings for children presenting with these symptoms. You're saying doctors are intentionally misdiagnosing children for profit? I'm saying that when a medication costs $3,000 a month and the doctor gets a percentage, there's incentive to see ADHD instead of looking deeper, especially when the families can afford it without question. Richard's face darkened, the expression that had terrorized boardrooms across Silicon Valley. If this is true, it's not just true here, Belinda interrupted, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Look, 17 children in Manhattan's Upper East Side, all diagnosed with ADHD by doctors connected to Neurotech, all prescribed the same medication. And look at this. She pulled up another screen. 3 of them died in the last 2 years. Cause of death? Sudden neurological events. Strokes, Mr. Washington. Children having strokes while taking ADHD medication for conditions they never had. Little did they know, this decision would change everything. Richard pulled out his phone and made a call. Patricia, it's Richard Washington. I need the best investigative team you have, and I need them now. Yes, it's about Tommy, and possibly hundreds of other children. While Richard mobilized his resources, Belinda sat beside Tommy's bed, holding his small hand. She thought about Marcus, about all the children like him and Tommy, whose real conditions were hidden behind more profitable diagnoses. Ms. Johnson, a voice said from the doorway. She looked up to see a man in an expensive suit, definitely not medical staff. I'm Robert Clark, legal counsel for Neurotech Pharmaceuticals. I understand you've been making some very serious allegations about our partner physicians. I've been stating facts about medical observations, Belinda replied calmly, though her heart was racing. Facts that could be considered slander if shared publicly. You're a nursing student, I believe. It would be unfortunate if complaints were filed with your school about unprofessional conduct. Actually, let me pause here because this detail is important. Belinda stood up slowly, pulling out her phone. Mr. Clark, are you threatening me? I'm simply suggesting that a nursing student might want to focus on her studies rather than making waves she's not qualified to make. Qualified? Belinda hit record on her phone again. I was qualified enough to recognize a pediatric stroke when 6 doctors missed it. I was qualified enough to save this child's life. And I'm qualified enough to recognize a threat when I hear one. So please, continue telling me how Neurotech will ruin my career if I keep talking about dead children and pharmaceutical kickbacks. Clark's face went pale as he realized she was recording. That's not what I... Get out! Richard's voice cut through the room like ice. He stood in the doorway, and behind him were 3 people with cameras and recording equipment. Mr. Clark, meet my new investigative team. They've been recording from the hallway for the last 5 minutes. I believe you know Patricia Winters, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist? She's very interested in your story about threatening the woman who saved my son's life. Clark fled, but they all knew this was just the beginning. They had no idea they only had 24 hours before everything would explode. That night, Belinda couldn't sleep. She sat in Tommy's room watching his monitors when her phone buzzed. It was a notification from her nursing school email. Dear Ms. Johnson, we have received several complaints regarding your professional conduct during your employment at the Washington residence. Pending investigation, your enrollment is suspended effective immediately. Her hands shook. 3 years of work, of sacrifice, about to be destroyed because she'd saved a child's life and spoken the truth. They moved fast, Richard said from behind her. She hadn't heard him enter. They have to, Belinda replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Every hour that passes, more people learn the truth. You're not fighting this alone, Richard said. I've already called Columbia's president, explained the situation, mentioned the size of my usual donations. I don't want to win because of your money. You'll win because you're right. The money just ensures they listen long enough to hear the truth. What happened next still makes my heart race. The next morning, Belinda woke to her phone exploding with notifications. The video of her saving Tommy had gone viral. Not the one she'd posted, but security footage from the mansion that somehow got leaked to the media. The headline, Heroic Maid Saves Billionaire's Son After Recognizing Stroke Symptoms 6 Doctors Missed. But there was more. Patricia Winters had published her preliminary investigation overnight. The article was devastating. The prescription pipeline, how pharmaceutical companies turn children's symptoms into profit. 3 more families had come forward. Children who'd had strokes while being treated for ADHD they never had. Parents who'd questioned the diagnosis but been dismissed as anxious or in denial about their child's behavioral issues. Richard had scheduled a press conference for noon, but at 11 a.m., something happened that nobody expected. Dr. Morrison himself walked into Tommy's hospital room. Mr. Washington, he said smoothly, I heard about Tommy's unfortunate event. I came to offer my services. Your services? Belinda stood up, placing herself between Morrison and Tommy's bed. You mean like the services you provided for 3 years while he was having strokes you never bothered to look for? Young lady, you're hardly qualified. She's more qualified than you, Richard said coldly. She saw what you chose not to see. Or should I say, what you were paid not to see? Morrison's face flushed. That's a serious accusation. Yes, it is, Patricia Winters said, entering with her camera crew. Dr. Morrison, would you like to comment on the $2.3 million you've received from Neurotech over the last 3 years? Or the fact that 89% of your pediatric patients are prescribed their ADHD medication? Can you imagine how terrifying that must have been? Watching the man who was supposed to heal children revealed as someone who'd been harming them for profit. Morrison tried to leave, but Richard blocked his path. My son could have died. Other children did die. And you knew. You had to know. ADHD is a legitimate diagnosis, which requires ruling out other conditions first, Belinda interrupted. Page 1 of the diagnostic manual. Rule out physical causes. You never ran a single neurological test on Tommy. Not one. The family never requested, because they trusted you. Belinda's composure finally cracked. They trusted you with their child's life, and you sold it for pharmaceutical kickbacks. My brother is in a wheelchair because of doctors like you. How many other kids are damaged or dead because you saw dollar signs instead of symptoms? In exactly 17 minutes, the truth would shock the nation. The press conference was held in the hospital's main auditorium. Richard stood at the podium, but it was Belinda who spoke first. My name is Belinda Johnson. I'm a nursing student, and until 4 days ago, I was a maid in Mr. Washington's home. I'm here because I recognize the symptoms of a stroke in a 7-year-old boy, symptoms that 6 different doctors had missed or ignored over 3 years. She held up Tommy's brain scans. These white spots are strokes, each one dismissed as behavioral problems, each one treated with expensive medication instead of proper diagnostic testing. And Tommy isn't alone. The screen behind her lit up with photos. 17 children, all from wealthy Manhattan families, all diagnosed with ADHD by Neurotech-affiliated doctors. 3 of these children are dead, Belinda continued, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. 14 are living with permanent damage, all because a diagnosis of ADHD is worth $36,000 per year per child in medication profits, while a proper neurological workup costs less than $1,000. The room erupted with questions, but Richard took the microphone. My son is alive because a young woman making minimum wage knew more about medicine than doctors making millions. She's being threatened, her education is being sabotaged, all because she dared to speak truth to power. But I have power too, and I'm going to use it. He announced the creation of the Tommy Foundation, dedicated to providing free neurological screening for any child diagnosed with ADHD. The initial funding, $100 million. And, he added, looking directly at the cameras, I'm filing criminal charges against every doctor who chose profits over my son's life, starting with Dr. Morrison. But that's when they discovered something that made everything even worse. After the press conference, Belinda's phone rang. It was her mother. Baby, you need to come to the hospital. It's Marcus. Belinda's brother, the one whose stroke had started her journey into nursing, had collapsed. When she arrived at his hospital in Brooklyn, a world away from the gleaming halls where Tommy was treated, she found out why. His medication, her mother said, tears streaming. The one for his post-stroke therapy. Insurance stopped covering it 6 months ago. We've been rationing it, trying to make it last. The medication cost $800 per month. The same pharmaceutical company that made Tommy's unnecessary ADHD medication also made Marcus's essential stroke recovery medication. One they priced high because rich families could afford it. The other they priced high because desperate families would pay anything. Both ends, Belinda whispered. They're playing both ends, creating fake diagnoses for the wealthy while pricing real medications out of reach for everyone else. Richard, who'd followed her, overheard. How much does Marcus need? Mr. Washington, I didn't save your son for, how much? $800 a month. But there are thousands like him. Then we help thousands. The Tommy Foundation just expanded its mission. Actually, let me tell you how this story really ends. 6 months later, Belinda stood in a courtroom testifying in the case against Dr. Morrison and 6 other doctors. They were convicted of medical fraud and negligent homicide. Neurotech Pharmaceuticals was fined $2.8 billion and forced to restructure. Tommy had made remarkable progress in his recovery. He would always have some challenges from the years of missed strokes, but with proper treatment and therapy, he was thriving. He'd even started learning sign language to communicate with Marcus, who'd become like a brother to him. Belinda had graduated from nursing school with honors and a full scholarship courtesy of Columbia's president, who'd rather publicly support a hero than explain why they'd tried to expel her. She'd been offered positions at every major hospital in New York, but she'd chosen differently. The Tommy Foundation Free Clinic opened in Brooklyn, 6 blocks from where Belinda had grown up. It provided free neurological screening for children, regardless of income. The waiting room was always full. Parents who'd been told their children were problematic, finally getting real answers. On opening day, Richard had asked her, "Why here? You could work anywhere." "Because the Tommies in Manhattan have advocates," Belinda replied. "The Marcuses in Brooklyn need them more." The clinic's first patient was a 5-year-old girl whose behavioral problems turned out to be absent seizures. The second was a boy whose learning disability was actually hearing loss. By the end of the first month, they'd identified 12 children with treatable conditions that had been missed or dismissed. But the most powerful moment came when Tommy himself visited the clinic. He was walking now, talking clearly, a miracle of modern medicine and early intervention. He stood in front of a room full of families and said, "I was lucky. My dad has money and power, but I was really lucky because Belinda saw me, not as a problem to fix or a prescription to write, but as a person who needed help. Every kid deserves someone who really sees them." The clinic's wall bore a plaque with words that Belinda had said during that first press conference. "Sometimes the most important voice in the room is the one nobody expects to speak." Today, there are 17 Tommy Foundation clinics across the country. The Belinda Protocol, mandatory neurological screening before ADHD diagnosis, has been adopted by pediatric associations nationwide. Thousands of children have been properly diagnosed and treated because one young woman refused to be silent when she saw something wrong. And Belinda? She's Dr. Johnson now, running a revolutionary pediatric neurology program that trains nurses and maids and teachers and parents, the people who see children every day, to recognize the symptoms that doctors might miss. Because she knows that sometimes the person who saves your life isn't the one with the most degrees or the biggest salary. Sometimes it's the one who cares enough to really look, brave enough to speak up, and stubborn enough to keep talking, even when powerful people try to silence them. The Washington mansion still has maids, of course, but now they're all trained in basic medical recognition. Richard jokes that he has the most medically qualified cleaning staff in Manhattan. But it's not really a joke. It's an acknowledgement that every person in a child's life might be the one who notices something wrong in time to save them. And in Tommy's room, hung prominently on the wall, is a photo from that first day. Belinda in her maid's uniform, holding his hand in the ambulance. Below it, in his 7-year-old handwriting, slowly relearned through months of therapy. "The angel who saw me when I was invisible." Because that's what Belinda Johnson did. She saw a child in distress when everyone else saw a behavioral problem. She spoke truth when silence would have been safer. And she proved that sometimes the most powerful thing in the world isn't money or position or credentials. It's simply refusing to let a child suffer when you know how to help. If you enjoy this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more.